My name is Amanda, and I thought I understood the meaning of heartbreak. But nothing prepared me for the night my world collapsed with a single sentence. It was late, the house quiet except for the steady hum of the refrigerator. I was cradling our newborn daughter, watching her tiny chest rise and fall. Her fingers curled around mine like I was the only safe place she knew. My husband, Darren, walked into the living room, his expression carved from stone. He looked at me, then at the baby, and with a voice colder than winter he said, "She is not mine." First I thought he was joking. My heart stopped, then stumbled, then raced. I whispered, "What do you mean?" My arms tightened protectively around our daughter as if his words might snatch her away. Darren's face was hard, unyielding. "I know she is not mine. I did the math. I watched the way you looked at me during the pregnancy. You wanted me to believe, but I don't. I'm not her father." The words hit me like glass shattering against concrete. Every syllable cut deeper than the last. My throat closed, my stomach twisted, and still I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Then whose child do you think she is?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence drag out, like a noose tightening around my neck. Then finally he said it. "Don't play dumb, Amanda. I know about you and Daniel." Daniel. My mind spun. Daniel was his coworker, his friend, a man I had barely spoken to outside of polite dinners and office gatherings. The accusation was absurd, baseless, but Darren spoke it with the venom of someone who had been rehearsing the lie for months. I felt heat rush to my face, the kind that burns when you're accused of something unspeakable. I shook my head, clutching the baby tighter. "I have never been unfaithful to you. Never." But he was relentless. His words weren't just about doubt. They were crafted, sharp, deliberate. This wasn't suspicion. This was accusation weaponized. And beneath it I saw something darker: projection. It was then in that brutal silence that a memory surfaced. Darren working late more often. His phone face down on the table, messages erased, vague explanations. A gut instinct I had ignored. His cruel accusation wasn't a reflection of me. It was a reflection of him. And for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as my husband, not as the father he pretended to be, but as a man hiding something far bigger than his false claims. Still I said nothing. I only stared at him, my chest rising and falling with controlled fury. If he wanted a war, I wouldn't fight it with screams. I would fight it with truth. I kissed my daughter's forehead, whispered a promise only she could hear, and made a decision in that moment that would change everything. If Darren wanted proof, I would give it to him. But not the proof he expected. Because the DNA test I would demand wouldn't just confirm my child's parentage. It would uncover his lies. And when the results came back, it wouldn't be me who was exposed. It would be him. And so, as he stormed upstairs, muttering curses under his breath, I laid my daughter gently in her crib. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From purpose. He thought he had just accused me of the unforgivable. But he had only handed me the first thread. And when I pulled it, his whole life would unravel. The next morning, I woke up to silence that felt heavier than any fight we had ever had. Darren wasn't beside me. His side of the bed was untouched, the blanket perfectly smooth, as if he hadn't even considered sleeping near me. For a moment, I convinced myself he had left early for work. But when I walked into the kitchen, his coffee mug was shattered in the sink, and the trash can was filled with torn-up pictures of us. That was when I knew this wasn't just a passing accusation. This was war. I poured myself coffee with trembling hands, replaying every word from the night before. Darren hadn't just called me unfaithful. He had picked a name. Daniel. That meant this wasn't paranoia. It was planted. His cruelty had a source. As I rocked my daughter in the chair by the window, I scrolled through Darren's phone records on the shared bill. One number appeared again and again, late at night, weekends, even during work hours. A number I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. I called it once, and when the voicemail played, my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. A woman's voice, soft and almost too sweet, said, "You've reached Emily. Leave a message." Emily. The name hung in the air like smoke. My mind raced back. I remembered Darren mentioning an Emily in passing, someone from his office. He had brushed it off, saying she was just a new hire. My chest tightened. The betrayal wasn't hidden anymore. It had a name. When Darren finally came home that night, his tie was loose, his face drawn in a mask of anger mixed with something else. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. He didn't look at me as he threw his keys onto the counter. I stood in the doorway, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. I know about Emily. His eyes flickered just for a second, enough for me to see the crack in his armor. But then he smirked, cruel and dismissive. You don't know anything. I know enough, I said. Enough to see what this really is. You accuse me of cheating because you are the one who's cheating. For a moment, the silence between us was suffocating. His jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the counter. And then instead of denying it, he laughed. That laugh. Cold, mocking, hollow. Maybe I wanted more than a wife who lives in her own little world of dreams and fairy tales. Maybe I needed someone who actually listens. I felt my knees weaken, but I didn't let him see me fall. I locked my arms across my chest, meeting his gaze with every ounce of steel inside me. You will regret this, I said quietly. Not as a threat. As a promise. His smirk faltered just for a moment. Then he grabbed his jacket, muttering, You're pathetic, Amanda, before slamming the door behind him. The sound of the door echoed through the house, rattling my bones. I stood there, frozen, my daughter's cries piercing the silence from upstairs. And that was when the fire inside me changed. It was no longer pain. It was purpose. I knew what I had to do. It started with one step, the DNA test. Not because I needed to prove anything to myself. I knew my daughter was his. But because I needed evidence. Evidence that would not only destroy his lie, but also expose the truth he had buried under months of deceit. I contacted a lawyer the very next day. Her name was Patricia, and she spoke with a calm firmness that steadied my shaking hands. Amanda, she said, if your husband is already building a case against you, you need to build one stronger. Don't confront him with what you know. Collect proof. Quietly. Patiently. And when the time comes, we'll burn his house of lies to the ground. Her words were a lifeline. And for the first time since Darren spat those cruel accusations, I felt like I could breathe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a test. It was about dismantling the image Darren had built, brick by brick, until everyone saw what he really was. And if he thought he could laugh at me, accuse me, betray me, and walk away untouched, he was about to learn the most important lesson of his life. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I spent the next week moving through my days like a shadow, invisible even to myself. Darren thought his accusations had broken me. He strutted around the house with that smug indifference, believing I had surrendered. But the truth was I had never been more awake. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, became another piece in the puzzle I was building against him. The first step was the DNA test. I scheduled an appointment at a private clinic, one that guaranteed confidentiality. I didn't tell a soul. Not my mother, not my closest friend, not even Patricia, my lawyer. I swabbed my daughter's cheek myself, holding her tiny face steady while whispering promises she was too young to understand. This is for you, baby. One day you'll know. When I sealed the envelope, I felt the first real surge of power in weeks. Proof was coming. Cold, undeniable proof. But that wasn't enough. Darren wasn't careless. He was calculating. If I wanted to expose him, I had to dig deeper. I started with his car. While he showered one evening, I slipped into the garage. His glove compartment was a graveyard of receipts, gas stations miles away from his office, dinner bills for two, movie stubs with dates that lined up perfectly with the nights he had told me he was working late. My chest tightened as I photographed each one, filing them neatly into a folder labeled lies. The receipts painted a map of betrayal. And at the center of that map was Emily. Her name came up again in a series of emails I found when Darren carelessly left his laptop open. He had forgotten to log out before rushing to answer a call, and there it was, a thread of messages. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. Lines like "last night was exactly what I needed," and "she doesn't suspect a thing" screamed louder than any photograph could. I copied them, my hands shaking but steady enough to save everything to a hidden flash drive. Each piece of evidence built a wall between us. And yet, on the surface, I smiled. I cooked dinner. I tucked our daughter into bed. I even kissed his cheek goodnight, pretending I hadn't already seen the life he was hiding. but pretending had a purpose. I wanted Darren to believe he was winning, because men like him never looked over their shoulder when they thought their lies had taken root. He was too proud, too arrogant, too convinced of his control to imagine that I might be the one writing the ending. Meanwhile, Patricia and I built a fortress. She guided me through every step. Screenshots, timestamps, phone records, and even a recording app hidden on my phone. I caught his calls, his late-night whispers, his hollow promises. Each recording was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. But evidence was not just about proving his affair. It was about dismantling the narrative he had spun. He wanted to make me look jealous, unstable, unhinged. He had planted those seeds with his friends and even some of his family. If I confronted him without proof, I would be the crazy wife screaming into the void. So instead I gathered. Quietly. Relentlessly. One night, when he stumbled in late smelling of cologne that wasn't his, I felt the rage rise in me like a tidal wave. But I swallowed it, smiled faintly, and asked, "Rough day at work?" His relief was palpable. He thought I was blind again. And that false confidence gave me exactly what I needed, time. The DNA test results arrived in a plain envelope a week later. My hand shook as I opened it. The words blurred through tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. Probability of paternity. 99%. It wasn't just proof of my daughter's blood. It was proof of Darren's lies. I folded the paper carefully, sliding it into the folder with the receipts, the emails, the recordings. This was no longer just evidence. It was a weapon, and I was ready to use it. But before I could strike, I needed to draw him closer. To make him believe I was still trapped in his game. Because the deeper he sank into his arrogance, the harder he would fall when the truth came crashing down. And so I played my part. I laughed at his half-hearted jokes. I asked about his long nights. I let him believe Emily was invisible to me. All the while, the folder of lies grew heavier, waiting for the moment it would burn his perfect world to the ground. The night I decided exactly how that moment would look, I felt a calmness I hadn't known in months. Darren thought he was building a future with Emily. What he didn't know was that I was building his destruction, piece by piece, lie by lie, until the day came when he would lose everything he thought he controlled. And that day was closer than he realized. Gathering evidence gave me strength, but strength in silence can only last so long. I needed allies, people who would believe me when the time came, people who could help me turn proof into impact. The first person I turned to was Patricia, my lawyer. She had been patient with me through every hesitant phone call, never once pushing when I wasn't ready. When I laid the DNA test, the receipts, and the emails on her desk, she didn't gasp. She nodded, eyes sharp as glass. "This is more than enough to prove his infidelity and protect you," she said. "But if you want more than protection, if you want justice, we can build this into something much bigger." Justice. The word throbbed in my chest like a drumbeat. I didn't just want to survive Darren's betrayal. I wanted him to feel the weight of every lie he had stacked against me. Patricia guided me through strategies. Financial freezes, custody protections, timing my moves so he couldn't spin his narrative first. She reminded me that in court, truth is only half the battle, presentation is the other. And for presentation I needed people. So I reached out to the one person who had never doubted me. My sister, Rachel. She lived across town, and though we hadn't always been close, something about her steady voice on the phone gave me courage. When I finally told her the truth, that Darren had been cheating, that he'd accused me of being jealous, that I had proof, her silence lasted a long, heavy beat. Then she said, "Amanda, tell me what you need. Whatever it is, I'm in." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until I broke down crying into the receiver. Rachel became my quiet ally. She came to watch my daughter when I needed to meet Patricia or visit the bank. She distracted Darren with casual small talk when he stopped by her place, never revealing that she knew. She became my lookout, my safety net, the one person who reminded me I wasn't insane. Because Darren wanted me to feel insane. He wanted me to drown in isolation. But now I was not alone. Together, Patricia and Rachel helped me design the counterplan. Step 1. Secure my finances. Darren had debts I hadn't fully known about, debts he had hidden with creative accounting. Patricia helped me quietly move half our joint savings into an account under my name alone. Perfectly legal, perfectly timed. Darren would never see it coming. Step 2. Build a public stage. Darren's reputation was his pride. At work, among his friends, even with my family, he painted himself as the victim of my paranoia. So I decided his downfall had to be just as public as his lies. I began inviting family and close friends for a dinner at our home, a gathering Darren would assume was my desperate attempt to prove our marriage was fine. In reality, it would be the night his mask shattered. Rachel helped me craft the invitations. Patricia helped me decide which documents could be shown without legal repercussions. And I rehearsed, not just what I would say, but how I would stand, how I would breathe, how I would look directly into the eyes of everyone who had doubted me. But even as I built this plan, fear gnawed at the edges of my determination. Darren was cunning. If he caught even a glimpse of what I was doing, he could twist it, hide assets, manipulate our friends. So I kept up the act. I laughed at his empty jokes. I pretended to believe his stories about late meetings. I even complimented his new shirt, though I knew Emily had probably chosen it. Every performance was exhausting but necessary, because when the curtain fell, I wanted him blindsided. One night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, Rachel whispered to me from the doorway, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked down at my little girl, her tiny hands curled around her blanket, her face innocent and safe for now. "Yes," I said. "Because if I don't do this, he wins. And I will never let him win." The plan was set. The stage was ready. But even as I sharpened every edge of my strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling that Darren would not go down quietly. And that meant the night of truth might not go exactly as I imagined. Once the pieces were in my hands, the real work began. Evidence was power, but only if it was used at the right time, in the right place, with the right people watching. Darren had built his image carefully, calm, charming, untouchable. To break him, I had to dismantle that mask piece by piece. Patricia's office became our war room. We spread papers across her desk like battle maps, DNA test, financial statements, phone logs, even Darren's emails that I had managed to pull from the cloud. She showed me how to align them into a story, not just scattered facts. "Judges," she said, "don't just look at documents. They look at narratives. Your job is to show not only that he lied, but how those lies ripple through your life and your daughter's life. The cleaner the story, the faster his credibility collapses." For weeks, I became a storyteller. Except this wasn't fiction. This was my survival. Rachel, meanwhile, helped me with the second front. Appearances. Darren loved gatherings. He thrived when all eyes were on him. He believed charm was his shield. So Rachel and I worked on creating the perfect setup for his exposure. A dinner disguised as a reconciliation attempt, but in truth designed as a stage for revelation. I practiced in front of the mirror. Not tears. Not rage. Control. I wanted to stand in front of everyone, steady as stone, while Darren unraveled. That would sting more than any outburst. But revenge is not just about the show, it is about the aftermath. Patricia taught me how to quietly reposition assets, freeze certain accounts, and prepare custody filings. She reminded me of one golden rule. If you strike, you must already be safe. So while Darren believed I was forgiving, I was moving money. While he thought I was cooking dinner, I was practicing my speech. While he smirked and called me jealous, I was turning his own words into weapons. The plan had 3 layers. First layer, financial security. I moved what I could legally into accounts under my name. I secured the deed of the small property I had inherited from my parents, making sure Darren couldn't touch it. He would try to strip me bare. I would not let him. Second layer, public exposure. The dinner would be my weapon. I decided every chair had to be filled, friends, family, colleagues. If Darren wanted to play the victim, let him try in front of a room where every mask would slip. Third layer, legal strike. Patricia prepared papers, divorce filings, custody protections, financial freezes, ready to be triggered the moment I said the word. My revenge would not end with humiliation. It would end with consequences. But as the plan grew sharper, so did my fear. Darren had instincts. He could sense when something was off. One evening, as he scrolled his phone at the kitchen table, he looked up at me suddenly. "You've been quiet lately. Not jealous anymore?" He said it with that smirk, half mocking, half testing. My hands tightened around the dish towel. Inside I was raging. Outside I smiled faintly and said, Maybe I'm learning. He bought it, or at least he pretended to. But that moment reminded me of the risk. If Darren caught wind of the plan, even a hint, he could twist everything. He could drain accounts, manipulate friends, or disappear altogether. So I doubled down on secrecy. Rachel and I used code words over the phone. Patricia and I met in odd hours. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, pretending at home while preparing for war behind the curtain. And yet, every night I felt stronger. I wasn't just surviving Darren anymore. I was designing his downfall. When I rehearsed the dinner speech with Rachel, she stopped me midway. "Amanda," she said, "you're ready. You're not the same woman who called me crying weeks ago. You've turned this into power." Her words sank into me like steel. For the first time in months, I believed it. The date was set. The guest list confirmed. The papers prepared. But even the best plans have cracks. And on the night everything was supposed to fall perfectly into place, something happened that I never expected, something that threatened to undo it all. The night had finally arrived. Every detail was in place. The restaurant's private room was lit softly, candles glowing against crystal glasses, a setting Darren believed was his stage. What he didn't know was that it was mine. I wore black that evening. Not mourning, not anger, power. My hair pulled back, my voice rehearsed, my smile steady. Rachel sat at the far end, a silent ally. Patricia wasn't there, but her presence echoed in every envelope of paper resting quietly in my handbag. One by one, the guests arrived, Darren's colleagues, his closest friends, my family. They thought it was a reconciliation dinner, a chance to see us renew what had frayed. Darren moved through the room like a host, his laughter carrying, his hand brushing mine only for performance. I was ready. Every second ticked louder in my chest. Soon, the speech I had memorized would turn this room into a courtroom. And then the pivot. Minutes before dessert, Darren's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, froze, then excused himself with a stiff smile. I watched him step into the hallway, his back tense. Rachel's eyes met mine. Something was wrong. I slipped quietly toward the hallway, heart pounding. From the shadows, I saw Darren huddled over his phone. His voice low but urgent. "She's planning something," he hissed. "I can feel it. I don't care if it's tonight, be ready. Delete everything. Burn it if you have to." My stomach dropped. He knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not details, but enough. My carefully built tower swayed dangerously. I couldn't risk him vanishing before the reveal. If he walked back into that room suspicious, if he pulled his charm card, if he turned people against me first, my plan would collapse. I steadied my breath. This was the moment Patricia had warned me about. When control begins to slip, you don't panic. You pivot. So I changed the order. I didn't wait for dessert. I walked back in as Darren followed, his eyes darting around the table, calculating. He raised his glass, ready to speak. But before his voice filled the room, mine did. "Before we toast," I said, my tone calm, "I have something to share." The room stilled. Glasses hovered midair. Darren froze. My hands trembled, but I masked it by unfolding the papers. DNA results. Financial records. Text messages. The proof. But before I could lay them down, Darren cut across me, desperate. "Amanda is jealous." He laughed too loudly, his charm cracking. "She imagines things. She wants to make me look bad." I held his gaze. "Then let's let the truth speak." I laid the first page flat on the table. Silence thickened. And just as I prepared to read, Darren lunged, snatching at the papers. Gasps broke the air. Guests shifted, shocked, unsure. This wasn't part of my plan. He was panicking early, fighting dirty, clawing like a cornered animal. Rachel rose, her voice sharp. "Sit down, Darren." But he didn't. He stood trembling, holding the papers close, his mask peeling before their eyes. "She's lying," he shouted. And in that instant I knew. His desperation had just handed me a weapon stronger than any words I had rehearsed. Because now everyone wasn't watching me. They were watching him unravel. The room was no longer filled with polite laughter and soft music. It was heavy, suffocating, the air charged like a storm about to split the sky. Darren stood with his fists clenched around the papers he had just stolen from my hands. His face, once charming, looked wild, his eyes darting for escape routes that no longer existed. "Lies," he barked, his voice breaking. All of this is fabricated. Amanda. He stopped himself, realizing he had used my name as if begging, not commanding. That small slip cut deeper than a knife. I rose slowly. My hands did not shake this time. I had waited for this moment for months. You say lies. I asked, my tone calm, low, steady. Then let everyone here decide for themselves. I turned to Rachel. Without hesitation, she slid a small black folder across the table. Darren lunged to stop her, but 3 of his colleagues were already on their feet, holding him back, their faces pale with confusion and disgust. The folder landed in front of me. I opened it with deliberate care, each movement echoing in the silent room. Inside were printed screenshots of Darren's late-night text messages, hotel reservations, bank transfers, all evidence of the double life he had maintained with meticulous lies. I picked the first page, holding it up high enough for everyone to see. "Read it yourselves," I said. My voice didn't waver. A hush fell as the nearest guest took the page from me, their eyes scanning the words. Then another guest leaned closer, reading over their shoulder. A ripple of shock spread around the table like fire on dry grass. Murmurs turned to gasps, gasps to whispered outrage. Darren struggled against the hands gripping his arms. "Stop." She twisted everything. "It's out of context." But his words crumbled against the weight of undeniable proof. One of his friends, a man who had always defended him, stood now with trembling hands, voice low but cutting. "You booked a weekend at the Shoreline Inn. I was at your house that weekend. You told me you were sick." Darren's face flushed crimson. His mouth opened, then closed, words abandoning him like deserters in battle. I stepped closer. My heels clicked against the floor, the sound sharp, final. "You mocked me, Darren. You said I was jealous, that I was imagining things. Tonight, every single one of them can see that it wasn't jealousy. It was truth." The silence that followed was unbearable, until I broke it. I pulled the final page from the folder. The DNA test, proof of a child that wasn't mine, proof that Darren's affair had left more than betrayal behind. "This," I said, my voice like steel, "is not imagination. This is the family you thought you could hide." The page fell onto the table with a slap. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the whisper started again, sharp and furious. Rachel stepped beside me, her voice carrying. "You tried to gaslight her. You tried to bury her. But tonight, Darren, it's your lies that are buried." He broke then. His knees buckled, his body sagging into the chair he had once claimed like a throne. His hands covered his face, but it was too late. Everyone had already seen him. Not the charmer. Not the provider. Not the loyal partner. Just a man exposed in the harshest light possible. And I stood tall, steady, letting the silence stretch. Because silence was no longer my prison. Tonight, silence was my victory. The moment the DNA test hit the table, it was as if the room itself fractured. Conversations erupted all at once, layered voices cutting into each other like jagged glass. Some gasped, some cursed under their breath. Others simply stared at Darren as if they had never seen him before. His mother was the first to rise. She had always adored him, always defended him, always told me I was lucky. Her face now was pale as chalk, her voice trembling. "Tell me this isn't true, Darren. Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Darren lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." But before he could finish, his sister slammed her glass onto the table, the sound sharp and merciless. "Not what it looks like. You lied to all of us. You dragged us here to celebrate your success while hiding this behind our backs?" Her voice cracked with fury. "You humiliated her, Darren. You humiliated all of us." Rachel leaned forward, her gaze cold, measured. "Do you understand now why I helped Amanda? Because we were all living in your theater, applauding your performance, while you mocked the one person who gave you everything." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their whispers growing louder. Some pulled out their phones, scrolling quickly, cross-checking dates and names against their own memories. A man at the far end of the table muttered, "My God, the audacity." Darren stood abruptly, the chair screeching across the floor. "Enough. This is between me and her." He jabbed a finger in my direction. "You all have no right." But the room was no longer his stage. A colleague he had worked with for years stepped forward, eyes blazing. You made it our business the moment you invited us here. The moment you paraded your perfect life like it was the truth. His voice cut through Darren's protest. Now we see what's behind the curtain. Darren's jaw tightened. He looked at me, desperation flickering across his face. Amanda, please. Stop this. We can fix it. We can talk. I raised my hand and the room went quiet. There's nothing to fix, Darren. You laughed at me when I begged for honesty. You told me I was jealous, crazy, insecure. Tonight, everyone can see that the only insecure one here is you, so insecure you had to build your kingdom on lies. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. His best friend, once his biggest supporter, slowly shook his head. You had everything, Darren. A woman who loved you, a family who trusted you, a future anyone would envy, and you threw it all away. The silence that followed was not heavy like before. It was damning. The weight of judgment pressed on Darren from every corner of the room. His mother sat down, covering her face with trembling hands. His sister turned her back on him entirely. His colleagues whispered to each other, already calculating the fallout for his reputation and career. Darren tried to speak again, but this time no one listened. No one believed. The man who once commanded every room with his charm was now powerless, drowning in the truth he could no longer bury. And I stood there watching, not with anger anymore but with clarity. This wasn't just my revenge. This was his reckoning, unfolding in real time before the very people he had fooled the most. The morning after felt like waking up in a different world. My phone buzzed nonstop. First I was too afraid to look. But when I did, I saw message after message pouring in. Friends, colleagues, even people I barely knew. Some were shocked. Others said they had suspected but never dared to speak. And then there were those who simply wrote, "Proud of you." Darren, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. He had stormed out of the restaurant the night before when the truth exploded in front of everyone. But not before his face drained of color. Not before he shouted that I was insane, desperate, vindictive. Yet no one believed him. The screenshots, the timeline, the undeniable words in his own messages. Those were louder than his voice could ever be. Later that day, I learned he had called in sick to work. But sick leave doesn't protect you when the company's board is already questioning your integrity. By noon, his name was circulating in professional forums. By evening, he was trending on social media. Not as the respected consultant he had built his career to be, but as the man who mocked his partner while sneaking around with someone else. And the woman he betrayed me with? She vanished just as quickly as she had appeared. I heard whispers that she deleted her accounts, blocked numbers, went silent. Betrayal doesn't breed loyalty, I realized. If he could discard me so easily, why wouldn't he discard her when the pressure mounted? I spent the afternoon with Rachel, my best friend, who brought takeout and sat cross-legged on my couch. She asked me if I felt relief. I paused. Relief wasn't the right word. What I felt was power. For the first time in years, the scales were balanced. But I also felt the weight of what came next. This wasn't just about exposing Darren. It was about reclaiming my own life. My savings, my home, my name, all of which he had entangled with his arrogance, were now mine to guard. And I wasn't about to let him crawl back or twist the story into something it wasn't. That evening the phone rang again. This time it was Darren's mother. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her name. She sounded tired, broken. She asked me why I had done it so publicly. I told her the truth. Because Darren had made a mockery of me in private for too long, and the only way to stop the performance was to end it on a stage he could not escape. She didn't argue. She simply whispered, "I wish my son had been a better man for you." The next day, I received an email from a lawyer Darren had hired. He wanted the apartment. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to intimidate me with paperwork. But what he didn't know was that I had already spoken to my own lawyer months earlier, quietly preparing for this very moment. Every bill I paid, every receipt I kept, every detail I documented, it all painted the picture of who really held the rights. And it wasn't him. News of his unraveling spread quickly in our circle. Invitations dried up. Mutual friends chose sides, and most didn't choose his. Some people even sent me screenshots of Darren's frantic messages, begging them to believe he was the victim. But the tide had already turned. He was the architect of his downfall, and I had simply pulled away the curtain. That night I stood by my window looking out at the city lights. For the first time in years I felt something close to peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I knew I had taken the one thing Darren thought I would never have, the courage to stand tall and let his lies crumble in front of everyone. Yet peace didn't mean silence. The legal battle ahead loomed, and the reputation he once hid behind was gone. I had stripped him of the mask, but there was one more chapter to write. Because Darren had spent months laughing at me behind closed doors. Now the world was laughing at him. And tomorrow I would decide what pieces of my life I wanted to rebuild, and what pieces of his I wanted to leave scattered forever. The days that followed unfolded like scenes from a film I never imagined myself starring in. Each morning I opened my eyes and realized I was no longer carrying the weight of secrets that were never mine to keep. The world knew Darren's truth, and more importantly, so did I. It would be easy to say I felt nothing but triumph, but that would be a lie. There were moments when I questioned myself, when I asked whether I had gone too far, whether exposing him so publicly had crossed some invisible line. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the humiliation he had fed me in private, the smirks, the dismissive comments, the whispered lies that sliced deeper than any shouted insult could. He had chosen the battlefield long before I did. I had simply chosen the weapon of truth. The legal fight that followed was messy, but it was one I was prepared for. My lawyer, calm and methodical, dismantled Darren's claims one by one. Every receipt, every bank statement, every record of me covering his debts and supporting his lifestyle spoke louder than his excuses. When the judge handed down the decision, it was clear. Darren had no claim to the apartment, no claim to my savings, no claim to the future he once tried to script for me. The look on his face in that courtroom was something I will never forget. It was not rage. It was not even sorrow. It was emptiness, the hollow gaze of a man who had lost the one thing he never thought he could, control. And when he stormed out, his reputation in tatters and his illusions shattered, I didn't feel pity. I felt release. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt quietly but steadily. I redecorated the apartment, painting over the colors he had chosen, removing every trace of his presence. Friends who had drifted away returned with open arms, and family dinners felt lighter without the shadow of his arrogance looming over me. One night, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, I asked myself what lesson I wanted to carry forward. The answer was simple, yet profound. Never let anyone convince you that your instincts are weakness. He called me jealous. He called me dramatic. He tried to twist the truth into something ugly and unbelievable. But the truth has a way of surviving, and when revealed, it has the power to set you free. I began writing again, something I had abandoned while living under the constant pressure of Darren's judgment. Words poured out of me, stories of strength, of resilience, of women who refused to be silenced. My pain transformed into purpose, and slowly, I realized that Darren had not destroyed me. He had fueled me. Months later, I heard he had left the city. Rumors swirled that he was trying to start over somewhere else, but his name carried weight now, the wrong kind. Betrayal leaves stains that no new beginning can wash away. He would live with the story I told, the one he created through his own choices, and I would live free of it. If you are listening to this and you have ever been called jealous, dramatic, or unreasonable for daring to speak your truth, hear me now. You are not the problem. The lies are. The betrayal is. The silence is. And you have the right, the power to break it. I am Amanda, and I chose not to be erased by lies. I chose to hold my ground, to gather proof, to reveal the truth when it mattered most. Darren thought he could bury me under his image, his charm, his carefully crafted reputation. But in the end, I buried the illusion he lived by. So to anyone standing at the edge of doubt, wondering if they should dig deeper, wondering if they should trust the whispers of their heart, do it. Trust yourself. Believe the signs. And when the moment comes, do not be afraid to let the truth speak. It will roar louder than fear, louder than betrayal, louder than every insult thrown your way. This was not just my revenge. This was my rebirth. And if my story made you hold your breath, made you see a piece of your own journey reflected in mine, then do not walk away in silence. Share this. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, so you do not miss the next story where another voice finds its strength. And above all, remember, revenge is not about destruction. It is about reclamation. about taking back the pieces of yourself that someone thought they could steal. He tried to cancel me with lies. I canceled his entire image with truth. And that is the story I will carry forever.